Hello, my dears. Here I am again, the menopause lady. I say that a lot, and some people cringe when I say that, but for me, life is all about menopause. And if you're watching this video, it probably is for you too, whether or not you choose to admit it or announce it. You see, I'm fairly odd because I bring up the subject of menopause in just about every conversation. And why shouldn't I? I mean, when you think about it, menopause is one of the most common occurrences on Earth, for humans anyway. Other animals don't have menopause, but for humans, a full 1/2 of all humankind will spend a full 1/2 of their lives in the state of menopause. And yet, it is still the most neglected topic on Earth. And that's what I want to talk about today. The very title of this video is Menopause is the most neglected topic on Earth, or more emphatically, menopause is the most neglected topic on Earth. We've just finished a huge unit on osteoporosis that encompassed 35 videos. And the next big unit will be on Alzheimer's disease. But before I embark on that unit, I want to do a short series that I like to call the Neglect series. It'll include only 4 videos. I like to break up the big scientific units with some lighter topics, and while neglect of menopause is in no way a light topic, it is a good thing to address alongside the heavy medical stuff. Now, you won't find this as a standalone topic in my book, but you will see it everywhere you look, anywhere on Earth. So think about what I said earlier. Half of the world's population will spend half of their lives in the state of menopause. With an incidence and prevalence like that, you would expect menopause to be one of the most emphasized topics on Earth. How can something that affects half of the human population for half of their lives be neglected? Doesn't it sound ridiculous? So let's address the sources of menopausal neglect. This video is important because the neglect that overshadows menopause affects everything for the rest of your life. If you don't understand that, you'll be a victim of that neglect. Now, think about the things that are typical subjects of neglect. The very word neglect makes you think of things that are infrequent, uncommon, short-lived, or insignificant. You assume that they are subject to neglect precisely because they are infrequent, uncommon, short-lived, or insignificant. It's hard to imagine something big, obvious, common, long-term, or significant as a victim of neglect. So it's easy to understand neglecting to bring something unusual with you or neglecting to pick up a mess until later. And it's typical to neglect things that won't worsen over time or things that won't have disastrous long-term consequences. But menopause is not consistent with any of these typical characteristics of items of neglect. Menopause is just the opposite of all these characteristics typical of neglect. Instead of being infrequent and uncommon, menopause is inevitable and it affects every woman on Earth. And instead of being short-lived, menopause lasts half a lifetime. And instead of being insignificant, menopause is one of the most significant times in a woman's life, causing a lot of pain and suffering as well as imposing significant health risks. So let's look at the sources of this neglect and try to figure out how and why menopause is the most neglected topic on Earth. We'll start with you. Before you met me, and I started forcing these menopause tutorials on you, how much did you know about menopause? How much did you talk about it? How much time had you spent preparing for it? I'm going to bet that you hardly knew anything about menopause before I came along, because menopause is so neglected that you didn't even know what you didn't know. When women discover my YouTube videos, they binge. They watch one and then another and then another. They just can't get enough, especially if they watch them in order, starting from the very first one. And that's because this is the only real educational resource on menopause anywhere. Sure, there are other people talking about it, but their aim is to sell you a product or to promote a particular management style. They have an agenda. They're not just teaching. By the time most women find my menopause education, they have been miserable for years, silently. They're desperate for information, but don't want to breach the veil of neglect that surrounds the topic of menopause. So shh, they don't talk about it. What about your mom? Did she talk about it? Did she warn you about it? She probably sat you down when you were just a prepubescent to tell you about your periods before they started. Why didn't she just say, honey, you're going to start having your periods soon, and you'll have them for about 30 years, and then they'll stop when you're about 50. Starting and stopping them may both be a bit rough for a while. Just that tiny seed of information way back when you were a budding pubescent would have changed everything in terms of your preparation, and it would have avoided setting the stage for neglect of menopause. And what about your mom's own menopause? Did she share much about that with you? Most likely you reflect back now and realize that a lot of your mom's strange behaviors or moods had to do with her own menopause. But you only realize that now because of this education and your own experience with menopause. And you found yourself asking, why didn't anyone warn me about this? Why all this secrecy? Puberty and your first period weren't a secret. Why is menopause a secret? What about your friends? I mean, women talk about everything. We're not like men who can spend whole days together and never utter a word about anything personal. Men will talk about politics, sports, cars, work, hobbies, anything but themselves. But we women, after 15 minutes together, we know all each other's most personal details. We don't hold back on anything. So why do we neglect to talk about menopause? What makes it any different than talking about pregnancy, marriage, sex, divorce, etc., etc.? Why is menopause a taboo subject of neglect among you and your friends? So many of my viewers inform me that they tell all their friends about this education. And I always respond with, don't be surprised if 90% of them shun both you and the topic of menopause. And they always say that that's exactly what happens. And they just can't understand why their friends choose to remain ignorant about the entire second half of their lives. Well, it's because neglect makes ignorance easy. And since I brought up the topic of men a while ago, how much does your man know about menopause? Does he ask you what's going on? Or does he walk on eggshells, not daring to open up a can of worms? Does he just stay out of it and stay out of your way? I want you to think about something. Imagine what would happen if men lost all their testosterone. do you think they would just neglect the issue and suffer in silence? Or do you think things would be different? Ladies, I guarantee things would be a whole lot different. In fact, despite men's reluctance to talk about personal matters, their menopause would be so front and center that it would be impossible to neglect it. The focus would be so glaring that it would be impossible to miss it. No man would tolerate the symptoms of menopause without demanding relief. No man would demonize testosterone and believe that it's bad for him. No man would stand for being told that testosterone dominance is a dangerous thing. And no man would complacently just tough it out. They would all demand testosterone in a heartbeat. In fact, there would be an ATM, an automatic testosterone machine, on every street corner, in every building, and in every home. And testosterone would be free. Society's number one priority would be to make sure no man has to live without it. But women have handled menopause in quite the opposite manner. We've demonized estrogen, denied the inevitability of menopause, and suffered in silence. What about your boss, employees, or colleagues? I mean, I'm sure your workplace is all abuzz with talk about what's going on in people's lives. I mean, these are the people you see nearly every day, day after day. You develop long-term relationships with them. They know the play-by-play of your life to some extent. They probably know if you're married, whether your marriage is stable or not, and who your husband is. They probably know if you have kids, their ages, and what their interests are. They might even know a bit about the rest of your family, like your parents or siblings. They know when you get pregnant, how the pregnancy is going, when you're due, etc. The workplace probably has special accommodations for pregnant women too. I mean, there's special parking spots, maternity leave, and breast pumping areas. There's even paternity leave. So not everything about the female human is neglected in the workplace. So why aren't there any accommodations in the workplace for menopause? And what about the medical community? Are all doctors schooled in menopause so that they can be sure to meet women's needs? I mean, half of their patient population will spend half of their lives in the menopause. Isn't that a significant enough portion of the population to warrant an adequate education on the topic? No, doctors get barely any education at all on menopause, as little as 1 hour in their 4 years of medical school. And I mean 1 hour as 60 minutes. I do not mean a 1 hour credit. We don't have credits in medical school. Most doctors know very little about menopause, and yet every single woman will experience menopause. And the alternative and wellness professionals get no education on menopause at all. And look at all the women who seek help from them. Shouldn't a topic as vast as menopause be a part of their curriculum too? What about society in general? Does society value and support menopause as a rite of passage and respect? Or do they disdain it and ignore it? Why do we celebrate puberty, pregnancy, and parenthood, but shun menopause? Do you see what I mean when I say that menopause is the most neglected topic on earth? So now you see that this neglect exists at every single level. The contribution comes from every individual and every aspect of society. And the question is, what are you going to do about it? You know, I picked the hardest job on earth when I decided to provide this menopause education. Not only has there never been a menopause education for women, but women don't even know they need it. And even if they do know they need it, they don't make time to get it. I know I will pursue this endeavor for the rest of my life. And I also know that I'll only touch a very small percentage of menopausal women. But I hope I reach enough to raise the veil of neglect, even just a little bit. I intend to ensure that this education is still around long after I'm dead, and I hope that someday it induces a change in the attention that the world pays to menopause. It's just incomprehensible that something that affects half of the human population for half of their lives can be a topic of neglect. And that's what I'm trying to change for you and for every woman I reach. So even though this little neglect series of 4 videos is short, it's powerful. Don't neglect it. Come back next week when I talk about menopause as a public health issue. And until then, go to menopausetailor.me to schedule consultations anywhere you live. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Be sure you subscribe to my channel and tell everybody about menopause. Talk about it all the time. See you later. Bye.